All right, hello, and welcome back to our video podcast. Sorry for the abrupt stop from that slide. I'm not really sure what happened. We had some technical difficulties. Let's get right back in it. Still can't seem to make the screen disappear, but we're just going to go with what we got. Okay, so we're going to talk now about immigration. You're going to turn in your notes to the section on immigration. There's actually a little speech by a famous American in here. I'd like you to look that over. Take a minute. Maybe hit pause here for a second. Go ahead and read through it. Answer the questions. And you know what? We'll wait till I come back, and then we'll discuss what we decided, who we thought said that, and if it was this time period, or if I was tricking you and it was a different time period, like more modern or something like that. So let's talk about this major period of immigration. You can see right away that the major immigration, there are two groups, and they are no longer the original core group, which was, of course, Great Britain. Now we're talking about the Irish and the Germans. And we're talking about a huge number, 5+ million people who are going to be coming. At this time period, it's a 12-day journey. It was a difficult journey, but not like it was, 100 years ago. America was the land of low tax, no military required service, the dream of possible wealth and land ownership. So people were coming in huge numbers to try to have their own version of the great American dream. Let's start with the Irish. Right? Let's look at our Irish. This is a little picture that is going to show you give you a good idea about the tensions about the so-called American melting pot. So there's, Lady Liberty stirring up the citizenship bowl of Americans, but what do you see? You see this little Irishman, and we know he's Irish from the context of the time. And is he trying to blend in with everybody else? No, he's dangerous, and he's got his dagger, and he's going to cause all kinds of trouble. Why were the Irish coming in great numbers in the 1840s? They were coming because of the famous Black Forties, the potato blight. 2 million died, mostly of starvation in Ireland. It was a tough time, and they were still, remember, kind of enslaved by the British. They were too poor to go west when they got to America, so they were stuck in the cities. The Irish will land in places like Boston, New York. New York City quickly becomes the largest Irish city in the world, bigger than any city in Ireland, as a matter of fact. Their nickname is the Famine Irish. They're tough. They can fend for themselves. They stick around. They watch out for each other. When the Irish arrive, new Irish arrive off the ship, there's Irish waiting to get them because they figure out pretty quick how to get involved in politics. There's a secret society known as the Molly Maguires. I believe they were kind of like the Irish coal miner groups that got together and started to gain more and more control. But they were really clever at playing politics. And despite all the sort of discrimination, in many cases, Irish were considered lower on the social rung than slaves or African Americans were at this time. You'd see these signs all over the place. No Irish need apply. They even abbreviated it to NINA. There was terrible discrimination against the Irish because they were so different. They were considered to be savages, like almost animalistically. The politics, let's talk about politics. They very quickly realized that with their huge numbers, when they were allowed to vote, that they were able to create these political machines. If you gave the newly arriving Irish jobs and you gave them a place to live, they had to promise to vote for you, then you were able to get political and strong very fast. So this is the famous 5 Points neighborhood in New York City that had its Irish area, it had its Italian area, it had its, Italian came later, but Irish and German, and just all these different immigrant groups. And it was this very just insane, intense meeting of cultures of all over the world, essentially. And there was lots of violence and gang fights and all kinds of craziness going on here, famously captured in a movie. I don't think I'm going to show the whole preview, but I'll start it here for you. This is The Great Gangs of New York. Oops, and I just skipped it. You ought to go to YouTube and check it out later. The Gangs of New York. Fantastic, fantastic. A little bit on the violent side, and it leads right into the Civil War. So really interesting film. Here, this is supposed to be an Irishman. Look at the way he's portrayed. He's not even human, right? And there's the stereotype. He's got his alcohol, he's drunk, and he's got his, whatever it is, a gun or going off, or his club. He's violent, and he's drinking. That's your Irish stereotype. Here's another one. The Irish industries. What are they good at? The infernal machine factory. So they're getting their factory jobs. The polls, they're taking over the elections because they're organized. There you have them down there shooting somebody, the violence. And then, of course, the Irish beggars. It says, please help the lazy. And then it's just letting us know that, of course, this is who the Irish are sending to us. Nobody good, just those lazy bum beggars who are doing crime and all that. Let me point out that my family, my dad's side, were Irish immigrants who came in this time period, as a matter of fact. A lot of Irish will head west eventually. Chicago becomes the next big Irish city. It's such a big Irish city that on St. Patrick's Day, the river downtown, as you can see in this picture, is dyed green. It's mildly disturbing. It does regain its normal color a little bit later. Apparently it doesn't hurt anything, but I don't know, a little strange. Yes, I mentioned the political machines. These guys were good at organizing. This is a cartoon about the famous Boss Tweed of Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was the Democratic Party's machine that was built to get the immigrant vote and use that to create political power. In counting, there is strength. So you see sort of corruption being used to work the political system in one's favor. And here's the actual headquarters of Tammany Hall. Here's where it all happened. And we'll get into some of those details later. Let's talk about the Germans. Who were these Germans? They were uprooted farmers. They were having some crop issues. They were also liberal political refugees. A lot of them came as socialists, Democrats. There was a collapsing revolution in Germany. There was no real Germany to speak of anyways, and so there was a lot of chaos. They came with more money. They came better equipped and sort of ready to get to America and then to move west. So they had the money to get transportation. So they're not going to settle in the big cities. They're going to end up getting land and going west and going to places like Wisconsin. Wisconsin, where I went to graduate school, famous for its beer and bratwursts, which are the ultimate kind of symbols of Germanism. And you can see this cartoon here. Everybody's got their beer. Mom and dad have their beer. The little girl's sitting in a wagon on a beer barrel. The little boy behind him is drinking beer. Even the puppy dog has beer, and they're walking towards a sign that says lager, which is a kind of beer. This was the stereotype of the Germans. And they did tend to stick together, and they had German newspapers and German schools. They were influential voters, but not like the Irish. They didn't have that same kind of intense growth of power in politics. With one exception being Milwaukee, which was sometimes called the German Athens. Before I get to this slide, the Germans contributed quite a bit to the American tradition. Our Christmas tree, the Kentucky rifle, the wagon, kindergarten, that's a German word. These guys were outspoken champions of freedom, but like I said, they kept to themselves with their tight little communities that'll stay that way all the way until World War I. After that, we'll see some shift. There are also some very German religious groups that come, the Amish and the Mennonites, and they're still around today in their small little bubbles or pockets. And there's a big Mennonite settlement not too far from here, actually. Every time I've ever been to Pikes Peak, I've always been surrounded by Mennonites going up the mountain, and you can tell because they make all their own clothes. Anti-foreignism. Huge boom of this. Remember, I mentioned earlier that this is going to come and go in waves. And so this is another time of major anti-foreignism in America, to the point where there's even a political party that is created known as the Know Nothing Party, or it's nicknamed the Supreme Order of the Star-Spangled Banner. This was in response to what people called the invasion of the rabble, that all these strangers were coming, and so they were prejudiced. These groups, they said that America should be for natives of the soil. They didn't mean Native Americans. They called themselves the nativists. That they meant white American Protestants, right? They hated Catholics. That was their biggest enemy, of course. And this connects to the Great Awakening as well. There was really this idea and this fear of this foreign conspiracy, that these foreigners are taking our jobs and they're taking over our country and it's dangerous. Even Samuel Morse, Mr. Morse Code, was famous for giving a speech about the Catholic threat to the U.S. and how it was going to destroy America. The Know Nothing Party, very secretive, very anti-immigrant, and we're going to see all kinds of riots and violence. That movie that I didn't show you the clip from, Gangs of New York, captures some of that in New York, but Boston in 1834. In Philadelphia, you had 13 killed and 50 wounded in several days of fighting, with the Catholics fighting back. This is just a huge mess and a huge disaster. And yet, 20, 30 years later, these people start to become Americans and known as Americans. And we look back on today, and of course, Irish Americans, German Americans are as Americans, but we start to hear some of the same language about how we talk about immigrants and how we get scared of immigrants happening in cycles and in waves. And we're not at the second wave of that now. We're at kind of the fourth or fifth wave of that. And we'll talk about that later. Of course, when these immigrants are coming, there's always what we call the push and the pull. The push is why they leave home, but the pull is why they come here. And without the two together, you don't have mass waves of immigration. You have to have a reason to leave, and you have to have a place to go where there's jobs and the fact that, or at least the hope of a new future, a new way of doing things. Let's talk now about American politics in this time period, because we're having a revolutionary shift in the way politics function. It's usually referred to as the Age of Jackson, or the age of Jacksonian democracy. So what we're looking at are democratic trends. This is when America really does start to become a meaningful democracy, and it's the mid-1800s. So what is changing? The big thing that's changing is, one of the big things, is a shift in voter requirements. what you needed to vote. If you look at the map on the left, 1800, the most common was green. That was property. You had to have property to vote. Of course, look at Vermont, and Kentucky, those two states that had universal white male suffrage, UWMS. That's our key term there on your notes, or just WMS, white male suffrage. All white men of age, 21 or older, can vote. Look at 1830. Now it's still taxpayer qualifications. So you had to be a taxpayer. But there's already 6 or 7 states, 7 looks like, that were already doing universal white male suffrage. And by the end of this time period, every state will eventually have shifted to universal white male suffrage, which means that all the white men are voting. Now, generally we see this as a good thing, but sometimes it can also be viewed as not such a good thing. Here's a great British political cartoon making fun of American frontier culture. Right? So this guy just wants to have someone pass the mustard, and what does he do to get the mustard? He pulls his gun out because he's an American and he's got a hot temper. This is the 1830s, this cartoon. It's kind of a remarkable joke on us from way back then, from across the pond over there in England. Here's your voter turnout. If you look on the scale towards the right side there, that's 90, 100%. In the early years, voter turnout was quite small because not that many people could vote anyways. But then as we move through the time period, we're going to get up to 80% voter turnout as kind of our high point, 1840. But that's pretty solid, especially considering that today we're lucky to be in the 50s or 60s. All right, in terms of other democratic trends in the age of Jackson, what else are we going to look at? This idea of increased democratization. So like I said earlier, white male suffrage is increasing very quickly. We're also going to switch to what's known as the nominating committees. They used to have a thing called King Caucus. The old system was the Congressional Caucus. It was a bunch of congressmen already elected. Remember double distillation? These guys were chosen, and then they chose who could run. So there was very little public say in who got to run for office. Well, the new idea that came about, and it actually came about from one of the third parties, not from one of the two main parties, was the idea of a nominating committee, right? The nominating committee, let me see if I can remember the first example. I think I have it in here. The first party to do its nominating committee was known as the Anti-Masonic or Nullifier Party. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they did one, and after they did it, kind of everybody felt like you had to do it. And that's how we do it now, where anybody who's in the party can come and vote and help to choose who's going to be there. Now, it's still, you have to jump through a lot of hurdles to be one of the people that they might consider nominating, but it's a lot more democratic than ever before, really. We also have what's known as the spoils system, once described as throw their rascals out and put our rascals in. In other words, as soon as you get elected, you're going to kick out everybody that's in government that worked for the old guy, and you're going to give jobs to people who supported you. And there's a lot of government jobs to be doled out. And so that's a really powerful way known as patronage to build up support. And this will grow very quickly, and that's how the political machines also function, right? Because they're handing out jobs, they're handing out all kinds of things. We're also going to see the rise of the third party. People love to ask, what's the point of voting for a third party? And it's a famous American tradition, having a third party. And it really comes up in this time period. And the first important third party is the Anti-Masonic Party, or the Nullifier Party, right? These guys, they had a very specific cause. They opposed the Masons. They also opposed, or they supported nullification of a certain law that we'll talk about later, the Tariff of Abominations. And even if they don't get elected, they tend to do a great job at getting their ideas into the national dialogue. That's often the goal of a third party, more than anything else. And sometimes they end up getting even bigger and kind of replacing parties, but we'll talk about that later. Another important tradition that comes out of this time period is a popular campaigning style known as the crusade, right? The crusade, the idea that your opposition was corrupt and evil and out to destroy America. Remember the election of 1800 kind of brought this in, that if Jefferson's elected president, we're going to have to bury our Bibles and America will be destroyed. That was the technique, that it was all about, what we talk about today. Like, if the other guy wins, I got to move to Canada because I can't stay in this country because they're so terrible. Of course, how many times has our country actually collapsed because the other side won? We've switched back and forth between parties many times, which is a great thing. It shows a healthy democracy. And as far as I've noticed, the country's never actually collapsed yet. Knock on wood, hoping that, that's not happening anytime soon or anything. But that's the style. It's the crusade. It's like, we are going to, the bad guy's going to destroy the system, negative campaigning. And the best way to deal with a crusade, of course, is what we call a counter-crusade, right? So if you have one guy running because he's a crazy extremist, the other guy attacks him as another crazy extremist. And we'll get into that in great detail with Andrew Jackson. We're also going to move into what we call the second party system, not the two-party system, but the second party system. We used to have the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, but the Federalists were destroyed. Now we have the Democratic Republicans turning into the Republicans, turning into the Whigs. And the Democrats have stuck around, Andrew Jackson's party. And we're going to have this new party called the Whigs, and eventually the Whigs will get replaced by the Republicans. But we'll more or less still call that the second party system. People might call it the third party system, but that's okay, whatever. Here's, by the way, a political cartoon, in case you ever see this one showing. It says it's the caucus curs in full yell. And so there's Andrew Jackson, and he's bringing in the new system. The caucus is no longer going to be the way. It's going to be more about the people, democracy, equality. Speaking of which, here's our favorite French dude in American history, Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote the book Democracy in America. And he talks about the idea of the American equality of condition. Of course, not counting slaves and women and Native Americans and any other group that doesn't fit into the white male worldview. He comes in the 1830s. He's looking at a world with more than 1 million voters, where 50% of the adult white males are voting, 30%, in other words, of society is voting, making it pretty much the most democratic society in the world at the time, right? In that time period when he's writing, France has 1% of its people voting. England has 4% of its people voting. This has a major influence on society, right? What is this doing to society? What does this mean? He makes some really interesting conclusions that you can't study American history and politics without getting a little bit of de Tocqueville, right? One of the things that he talks about are centripetal forces. Those are the things that kind of are bringing us, the centrifuge is bringing us apart, centripede is bringing us together. So he's talking about, one thing he talks about is the suffocating conformity, that Americans are kind of told that we can be individuals, but there's so much individualism that we kind of all start to be conformists in our individuality, if that makes any sense. We can talk about that more later. The centrifugal forces, that's the rugged American individualism, the strong sense of standing alone. We've got both of these forces kind of pulling us together. What does that mean? What does that look like, right? Well, on top of that, America doesn't really have any hostile borders. We're kind of going to be done going to war with Canada. We'll have one little conflict with Mexico, but other than that, we don't have to deal with the European history of hostile borders. We also have a vigorous free press, right? And we have a very robust civil society. Americans love to join voluntary organizations, churches, and political parties, and all kinds of things, right? And so this idea of civic belonging and civic virtue, it's a habit of the heart, it's known as. It's this idea, this very American idea of being a part of something. And that is going to carry us through the 1800s all the way to the 1960s or 70s. And now there's kind of an idea that we're starting to change, right? What does America look like today? Look at those ideas before, but today, instead of de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, we have a famous book written about American politics that's called Bowling Alone. And he starts his book by looking at how bowling leagues have kind of disappeared. People don't go and join bowling leagues anymore. They don't do it as a group, as a society. Nowadays, people who bowl go with just a couple of friends and they go and they bowl. It's more individualistic. We've started to move away from the centripetal forces and focus more on the centrifugal forces, perhaps. But anyways, we're getting into too much detail about that. Let's move on. And let's talk about the election of 1824, and then we can wrap this up for now. 1824, the end of an era, the end of the era of good feelings. Jackson is going to actually run against a whole wide slate of fellows. We're going to have John Quincy Adams. We're going to have Henry Clay, the great compromiser, out of the Senate. We're going to have John C. Calhoun, one of the other war hawks. We learned about these guys when we did the War of 1812. It's really quite a crew. What happens is rather remarkable. There's also William Crawford. So there's actually 5 people running in this election. Henry Clay, of course, is appalled at the thought of Andrew Jackson. His famous quote, "I cannot believe that killing 2,500 Englishmen at New Orleans qualifies him for the various difficult and complicated duties of the chief magistrate." So we've got kind of an elitism going on there, Mr. Clay, right? Here's the results. Let's check it out. Now, it's kind of remarkable. Calhoun, by the way, ends up being vice presidential candidate for 2 different people running. So he had a pretty good chance of getting that, didn't he? We've got John Quincy Adams with 84 electoral votes, less than Andrew Jackson, who had more of the popular vote, right? And this is the first time we have a popular vote, by the way, but all that really actually matters is that electoral vote. So what is going to happen? Well, nobody has the majority, right? And so we have a crisis. We have an American constitutional crisis. And it's going to go back and forth and back and forth. And it's going to go into Congress because that's who gets to decide when we can't pick who's going to be the president, right? And there's no clear majority. The election's in the House. Clay hates Andrew Jackson. It goes back and forth. So eventually they make sure, a bunch of the congressmen make sure that the vote goes to John Quincy Adams. And Henry Clay gets to become Secretary of State, which was no small job at the time. That was the classic position you wanted to move into the presidency. A lot of Secretaries of States had become presidents later. And so John Quincy Adams, it's almost seen as though that was this totally corrupt bargain. It's known as the famous corrupt bargain because Adams nominates or gives Clay the position of Secretary of State, but Clay probably threw a lot of votes his way because he was in Congress and helped John Quincy Adams get the presidency with nothing resembling a majority and less votes than Andrew Jackson. Jackson's allies feel totally cheated and robbed, and they're going to just froth with anger for 4 years and get ready to come back in the famous election of 1828, which we'll talk about when I get back here and we do our our Andrew Jackson discussion. Here's another picture that really shows you just how divided things were. And if we have a slide, I can't remember if it's in here or not. It takes a whole year before the House of Representatives finally makes its decision. And there you see John Quincy Adams getting the majority. So 13 people elected John Quincy Adams president of America in 1825. That's really remarkable when you think about the history of our democracy, that it was 13 men who got to decide on who was president. John Quincy Adams is a rather intriguing president. We'll talk about him really, really briefly. He's the first president to be photographed. There he is. It's the earliest known photograph of a president. That's 1848. John Quincy Adams brings in this nationalism at a time he kind of embraces the famous Clay's American system. He wants to build roads and canals and a national university and federal support for science and tariffs and all this stuff. But he does it at a time when those ideas have started to go away, and actually Congress is celebrating states' rights. And so he has a disastrous presidency where he doesn't pass anything that he wants to do. He becomes almost more famous for his bizarre habit of swimming naked in the Potomac. I can't imagine a president doing that anymore. He has a very disastrous presidency. One of his major goals is to avenge his father's dishonor of being the only president ever to be not reelected. And so he's going to run again in 1828, and he's going to lose. So like father, like son, they'll be the first two American presidents to only serve one term. We're going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for sticking with us. Hope you got all of this down. Hope you enjoyed. It'll be posted later on the website. Talk to you later. Bye. Have a great weekend, and good luck, volleyball. Bye.